you.
Thank you.
So you are the ones who have made it to the heart of the matter. You're the ones who have made it to the... The ones who have made it to the meat of the class and the heart of the class.
Sashi Puki Jishin Metotram Real Shin Yindayam Sangha Shindu Mite Vivargi Drokun Nanda Shinla Jupasho Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Ninyatayami Sangha Jidam Zoki Jabnam Lam Janju Bardu Dakni Gyavsuchi Daki Jinyangi Pezanam Ki Trola Vanchir Sangha Drupasho Sangha Jidam Zoki Jabnam Ram Janju Bardu Dakni Gyavsuchi Daki Jinyangi Pezanam Ki Drola Vanjir Sangha Drupasho Sangha Jidam Zogi Jabnam Ram Janju Bardu Dakni Gyavsuchi Daki Jinyangi Pezanam Ki Drola Vanjir Sangha Drupasho.
So please sit comfortably and check to make sure that your spine is straight. We'll watch our breathing for 7 rounds, beginning with an exhalation. If your mind is drawn off, please go back and start again. Ask the holy being that you are closest to come here and join you now. You can show your humble respect and devotion by prostrating in your mind or bowing. You can see yourself covering all of space with emanations of yourself. Doing that. In your mind, imagine some beautiful, exquisite thing to offer them, some outer object. Something you find to be very beautiful, offer it to them. It could be a person or a thing or a place. See them delighting in it. Full of joy and happiness and bliss. Find some good quality in yourself that you admire and appreciate. Think of it clearly. Feel very happy about it. And offer that. Think of some negative aspect of yourself, harmful aspect of yourself. See it clearly. Think for a moment about the harm that it does. Specifically, tangibly. And reflect how you want to help every being, including yourself, and this is against that. Feel some regret in your heart about it. As strongly as you can. Think of some small positive antidote, offsetting activity to counteract this. Something you can do comfortably. Resolve to do it. And offer that to the Holy Being with you. Your intention and your plan to end this negativity in yourself. And from your heart, ask them to guide you to the end of all negative states within yourself. To lead you to every happiness joy and every bliss for yourself and every other being for all time. And again, focus upon their joy and bliss and happiness and them smiling, wonderfully pleased with your request. You can see or feel them above your head, glowing as an orb of light, adorning your crown, abiding there, blessing you. So, thank you, holy beings, for coming. Homage to all holy beings everywhere. Did you do your quizzes already? Not yet?
I can just do it later.
Anyone need to do a quiz right now? A couple more minutes. last week, if you recall, we did a brief meditation on penness, right? So we take a few seconds to review, right? So just think of it in an unexamined fashion, right? Just look at it in an ordinary, unexamined way and you think that's a pen, right? So now, do that for 5 seconds. Register the perception of whatever you want to register that is. Right? So now turn that off and just conceive of it as a black and white cylinder, whatever shape and color you like. Right? Just think of it that way for a moment. And then you can turn the pen back on, right? Just think of it as a pen, right? So, very simple, you know. I mean, an Aborigine from 100 years ago would admire your smooth stick, right? Or whatever it would be. You know, he's not calling it a pen and not thinking of it as a pen. So, you know, the eye can't see. We said last week the eye can't see pen, right? The eye can register colors and shapes, light and dark. The eye can only transmit electrical signals and data, and cells transmitting ions across membranes and whatever, however it works. The eye can't perceive a pen, right? That's coming from somewhere else. It's coming from the mind. Right? It's a construct. It's conceived of. So, penness doesn't come from this thing. The identity pen, the meaning, the nature, the concept of penness doesn't come from this thing, right? Imposed upon by the mind. Yeah. So that's what we did last week. So, like, I'm gonna draw a picture, and tell me at what point. Just be aware of your mind, all right? And be aware. And I'm a bad artist, so be aware of, you know, at what point your mind decides to assign an identity, right? Alright, I can't assign any identity to that.
Rolling pin.
Yeah, right.
Candle.
Alright. Yeah, I'll be a little better, alright? I'll do an approximation of this thing, right?
Maybe put Sharpie on the side.
Yeah, there you go.
Hold on.
Nice drawing.
It's a rocket ship with Sharpie on it.
I mean, if I were a better artist, as I were drawing, somewhere along the way, you would go, oh, that's a pen, right? I mean, if I were a better artist. Some of you may not have gotten there until someone announced it, but the point is at a certain point, you're taking in enough data for the mind to go, oh, that's a pen. And somewhere along the way, it's not a pen, and then there gets to be a little more line, or a little more color, or a little more shape, and all of a sudden you go, oh, that's a pen. So it turns into a pen at some point. You know, those lines and those images turn into a pen at some point, right? So it's another example of the mind assigning meaning and identity, right? I mean, you know, no matter how well I drew it, if an ant or a fly or whatever came into the room, I'm not going to assign that pen nature and that pen identity, right? So both perceptions are valid. The fly's identity of whatever that is, food or I don't know what, you know, and our identity of a picture of a pen are both valid, right? So, I mean, this is raw data. This is as I'm drawing a picture, as you're looking at the real thing. Is it that picture or that picture? Which one is the real thing? I don't know. Interesting. Is that one more real than this one? Functions differently. So anyway, not to digress. Both are valid perceptions, right? And both are based upon some raw data. So the color, the shape, you know, the word Sharpie if you need it, all those things are raw data. All right. So you say Dakshi.
Dakshi.
Dakshi means raw data. It's the stuff you take in with your senses that the mind is able to process into something. Right? You're taking something in through your senses, And it's a basis of thinking of something. In this case, it's a basis of thinking of it as a pen and calling it a pen. There's some sensory input, there's some sense data, right? So it's the thing that gets called a pen. It's the mental image which we create, which is imputed onto or put onto a pen. And it has a couple of, this has a couple of different names in Scripture. Please say Ming.
Ming?
Ming means name. And it's what the mind applies to the data. So the mind comes up with a name or a label and applies it to the data. Okay? It's what you turn on and you turn off. It's your mental construct. If I say, think of this as a pen, and I'll turn it off. When you think of it as a pen, you impute it again onto the raw data. That's the name that's being applied. That's the name that's being imputed, right? So it's a mental construct that's imposed, right? So if you want to do a meditation on emptiness, if you want to practice meditating on emptiness, it's a nice, simple way to do it. You can just take an object, doesn't matter what it is, and say, okay, let me deconstruct this as colors and shapes. Let me label it one way. Let me take the identity flower, and then, let me take the identity rose. Let me take this identity stem, petals, leaves, and go on and on and on. And practice sort of changing how you conceptualize it and how you turn that labeling process on and off. You label, withdraw the label, withdraw the label, right? So the question is the collection of the parts the flower? I'll stick with one thing just to not be too confusing. I drew my picture up there. At a certain point, you said, "Oh, I got enough parts up there," that you said pen, right? Or you look at it and you said pen. Is the collection of parts the pen? No. So then, what is the pen?
It's something we create.
It's your creation.
In our minds, it's the label that we put on that thing that we do.
Yeah, Majemica says, that's what Majemica says. Majemica says it doesn't matter if you get a bunch of parts together. It's not like you stir a couple of things in a pot and all of a sudden penness pops up. It's not like when you get a cap and a cylinder and an ink stick in the middle, all of a sudden penness arises and is radiated from the object, right? There is a collection of parts, but we still have to impose our meaning onto it, right? We still have to give it identity, we still have to give it a name, we still have to give it meaning, right? So, what about me? Am I my arm? No, obviously I'm more than my arm. Am I the collection of all my physical parts? Is that John?
Not completely.
So what would make it complete? What would make me completely me? Please tell me.
Me?
But I already have your daughter. Didn't work. Sorry. No, never mind. That's another story. Okay.
Sorry.
Yes.
This is going in the direction of the famous definition or description of pornography given by a Supreme Court justice.
I know it when I see it.
I can't tell you what it is, but I can tell you I know it when I see it.
Yeah, Master Shantideva doesn't do that. He's not that kind of guy,
It's really valid because it is. I know you when I see you. I can't describe what you are, where you begin, where you end, but when I see you, I can label you John.
Right, so
He was right.
the fact that moment is indefinite, indefinite as to definitions, doesn't mean that it's indefinite as to realization.
Yeah. Well, in Buddhism, there's a couple of Buddhism. These Buddhist logicians are very precise. Okay, they say, look, there are only a couple of possibilities. John either resides in one of the parts, like in my arm. John's like sometimes I think here or whatever. So John's here. This is where John exists and is. Or John is the sum of the parts, right? Or John is somewhere outside of all the parts. Right? Those are about all the possibilities, right? And Madhyamika would say, well, no, none of those. It's the concept which is applied to all of the collection of parts, right? So just having a collection of parts isn't enough to have John. you could have a hunk of meat and a person talking, and nobody's going to say that's John until the projection and the imputation is there. Yeah, man.
Yeah. Why can't you say the concept or the construct's also a part as well?
Is a part?
Yeah.
He says a part of John.
Can't you say like John is physical parts, mental part, and plus a construct?
You could. That's what we're actually getting into right now when we're talking about name. So there are actually 3 more to go. But you're on the right track. Yeah, exactly. So when we talk about John or a pen or anything else, and we say, look, it's a bunch of colors and shapes, which get a name put on it, right? How does understanding that bring me any happiness, right? I mean, why is that relevant, right? Why is it relevant to my daily life? I mean, Master Shantideva has gone through 8 chapters on not getting angry and joyous effort and all the rest. And now he's spending the 9th chapter, the last chapter, on talking about parts and projections and whatnot. I mean, and what role does that have in my ultimate happiness and my improving my life, right? I mean, how is understanding that I'm a construct supposed to make me happy, right? I mean, does me saying to myself, I'm a bunch of parts, but I'm not really John until I think of myself as John. I mean, how useful is that?
Because then we can choose how we see ourselves. If we're going to see ourselves as happy, or see it like the thing as a disaster or a lesson.
I'd like to see myself as happier. I'd like to choose to see myself as happier. I wish it were so easy that we could just choose to see ourselves as happier. We try, right? Say, I'm going to be happy today. I'm not going to be so bummed out today. I'm not going to have such a lousy day. I'm not going to have problems at work today, right? We try to choose those things. Unfortunately, it doesn't play out like that. So it's not consistent, right? And we make efforts, but it's not consistent. So, this thing will wear out and not function anymore. This thing will wear out and not function anymore. I mean, it's the nature of our lives, right? Karma wears out. So the karma to see myself as human will wear out. The karma to see myself as living and moving will wear out. And in the same way that this doesn't have to be perceived as a pen, I don't have to be perceived as wearing out and dying. All of these things are perceptual events. Calling this a pen is a perceptual event. Calling this a moving hand is a perceptual event. And this thing not moving and being called dead is a perceptual event. So given that it's all a perceptual event, which is forced upon us by our past karma, we don't have to see ourselves going through that process. We don't have to have that experience. We can collect different karmas. We're in Buddhism class. The Buddha didn't say, let's study this great philosophy because life will be a little bit better. The Buddha said, I'll teach you Kaganachi. Does anybody remember what those things are? Is it to put an end to? Anybody remember what the Buddha said he was going to put an end to? Teach you to put an end to? I mean, he didn't say I'm going to teach you. I'm going to create a utopian society here on planet Earth, in India, right? And 2,500 years ago, he didn't say I'm going to teach you to be a little calmer, right? I mean, he said, right, sickness, aging, death, right? I'll teach you to put an end to growing old, being sick, and dying, right? So that's what he taught. It's not that this is some kind of New Age philosophy, that this is a splinter faction of Buddhism, where we say, you know what, you don't have to get sick, age, and die. I mean, that's what the heart of the Buddha's teachings were, is that, I will teach you to put an end to sickness, aging, death, suffering, right? So, I mean, it's why we're here, and it's why we're studying this, and it's not some vague, faraway, philosophical mental trip that we're on. It's what the Buddha taught, and it's very profound that it's only possible because things are empty. It's only possible because this hand doesn't exist from its own side. That it could be something else. This hand, because it's empty, could be a tantric deities have, an angels have, all holy beings have. It's just a function of imputation. It's a function of perception. It's a function of projection. It's a function of karmas collected, right? So, if I collect the right karma, that forces me to perceive these parts as this holy, blissful thing, this holy, blissful experience. You have to learn about it, obviously. You have to learn how to collect that powerful karma. And then, harder than that, you have to actually do it. I mean, there's several problems along the way to actually realizing this. The first is getting qualified, authentic instruction, and then following that, of course, there's the difficulty of actually doing it and living it, right? Which is even harder. So, and if we don't, our life will just continue to be the way it is, where we just have ups and downs and problems, and then, we see ourselves suffer and die. So it's like that. Okay, please say Tanye. Tanye means term. It's a concept. You can call it a name, a mental picture. It's the name that's imposed upon the raw data by your mind, right? We said Dakshi was the raw data, right? So you're getting this raw data into your senses, going into the mind, and then the mind imposes a term or a concept or a name. The mind comes up with a term or a concept or a name, right? And where does it come from? It's forced upon you by past karma, right? Like, I don't know if you remember last week when I saw the fat little dog on the sidewalk. And, it wasn't like I said, I want to think of that shape and those colors and that movement as a fat little schnauzer dog, taking a crap on the sidewalk. It wasn't like this volitional thing, right? It just was there, right? So it's forced upon me by my past karma's ripening, right? And so, better karma, I'd see, like look at the holy being over on the sidewalk doing some magnificent thing. I saw a little fat schnauzer dog taking a crap, that was my karma, what can I tell you? So, and if we collect virtue, we see, maybe you'd see the dog and you think it's beautiful, and I love schnauzers, and isn't it wonderful, you have indifferent karma, if you have neutral karma, you don't care, right? So, anyway, so that's the process. That's the second step in the process, where you take in the raw data, the mind comes up with a construct or a name. And please say dokje.
Dokje.
Dokje means is impose. It's the imposer. The mind imposes the concept onto the raw data, right? The raw data is presented to the eye. The mind conceives of it, and then it's imposed upon the raw data. The identity, right? The label. The name is given to the raw data, right? That's a fat little schnauzer dog. That name was imposed upon the raw data. And then dokje is the main thing being run by your past karma. The imposition of the name onto the raw data is what's forced upon us by our past karma. Right? Please say takchu. And then the result. This means the product of the result. Basically, after you impose the name onto the raw data, then you have the result. Oh, there's a fat schnauzer there, and I'm experiencing it. Right? So first you take in the data, then you come up with the concept, then you impute it, and then you experience it. Right? You get a result. Okay. It's the result of the process. Okay. So. So then where is,
If you think of the cognitive moment that we have when we translate the raw data into what we then appreciate as pen, right? That moment of penness morphs into being, and the label pen is something which is applied ad hoc. In other words, we don't start with a label pen and then assemble a series of constituents that then fill the bill to make pen. We could just easily call pen crayon, after the fact, but it would still be referring to the same collection of characteristics. So it seems to me that the only purpose the label really serves is not to orchestrate the assemblage of qualities, but rather to communicate the assemblage of qualities to somebody else, to provide a common ground of communication. And the label doesn't really have anything to do at all with what our own internal process is, and arriving at that little bundle of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so
So-
it seems to be
Yeah.
something else altogether.
So if I understand you, you're saying that a label serves to communicate with others, but then what about one's inner process? Well, one's inner process tends to be, it can be intellectual or it can be emotional, right?
But the pen would be a it'll be just as much a pen if I refer to it as an or if I didn't refer to it at all, but just perceived
Yeah.
a collection of stuff without labeling it.
Well, in another language, it might be called you know, I don't know what this is called in Thai or something, you know.
Yeah.
But the point is not necessarily the audibles that represent the idea for this thing, right? What we're really talking, because this would apply in any language, right? I mean, it doesn't matter what language is being used. The idea is the conceptualization that goes behind it.
Right. So I'm saying that we could take every object we ever encountered and call it that. Okay, let's call it that.
Yeah, give it a name.
That,
Give it a
that,
whatever,
that,
yeah.
Call it all that.
Yeah, yeah.
But we would still have the same vast inventory of objects, all of which were referable to as that. The only thing we can't use that for is for me to talk to him and say, oh, look, there's a that, and you see there's a that.
Isn't that meditating on emptiness to remove that from the picture?
I mean, if I understand you, Bruce, you're saying that the identity is not so much the point, but the internal experience of it?
The label, okay, is being mistaken for part of my internal process of cognitive realization.
But that's the
That
Ming.
is- yeah.
That's the Ming, and then the name is the Tagni.
But see, that's what I want to advance, is the theory that with respect to one's own internal experience, that the name, the label, is really a useless appendage.
But
When it comes, you
Can you see the object and you look at the object and not have your mind go, pen?
yes.
Oh, you can't?
Sure,
But
you can
when you-
too. Because when you apply pen to it, you've already identified
But
it
it
as a
seems to me
that.
like as soon as you see it, pen is...
No, but I think
It's quick.
I think that's what he's saying. He's saying they're just calling it name, but then the second part, the Tagni, is the term we use, pen. But they call this thing name and concept, Ming, which is what you're describing, the thing.
Right, all I'm saying is that the name is an after-the-fact event.
Can I-
It has assumed its character as that thing. It's assumed its character as a that thing, not a this thing. And then we staple the name to it.
Michelle would like to say something.
I can't, yeah, I'm having a hard time conceiving of anything that could exist without, both simultaneously, instantaneously actually, or co-arising I should say. Like, you could have a moment of perceiving data and maybe not be calling it a pen, but at the same time, if you're still in the process of discerning, you're having some kind of label in your mind, whether you say it or not, whether you're deaf or not, whether you're blind or not. You could be having not visual experiences, and as long as you're discerning, you're still having a label that's applied to it, though it might not be pen. It could be raw data. It could be God. It could all be that, but then the label would still be that. So the existence of it, I can't think of a thing that its existence isn't co-arised with its.
Right, there's distinction
Label.
between other things. And
Yeah.
So, when you talk about inanimate objects, it's a little easier, right? To say, well, I can divorce myself from that fairly easily. I can not be drawn into that process. But then when you get into people pissing you off, or people hurting you, or people being attracted to people, much harder to not go through that process of taking in, like, let's say you see someone that you think is really beautiful, much harder to take in the raw data, have it processed into a concept and an image and an idea, and be imputed and be then reacted to, to get the result. Much harder to, so it's not really so much about, can you withdraw the imputation? It's just about, this is the normal way it works in general. You might go through the process of, I like that person, or I don't like that person, or I care about that, or I don't care about that. And those kinds of things are not so much the point, right? Like, where does the pen exist? Well, where is the pen, right? If you don't examine it, it's just there. There's examined and unexamined perception, right? And if you talk about ordinary unexamined perception, you just look at something and you go, I need to write, and where's the pen? Right? And you go looking for the pen, and you find the pen, and you write with the pen, and that's all fine, and that works, and that's no problem. That's our life. That's our ordinary unexamined reality. No problem. All good. Okay? You step in front of a taxi cab and it hits you and it breaks your legs. It works. Doesn't matter that you're examining it and analyzing it and saying, it's a projection forced on me by my past karma. It still broke your legs. So, and it functioned and it worked. So, we live in a world where we interact with unexamined reality. Everything around us is essentially unexamined reality. That's Hector, that's a wall, that's a Tonka, that's a fan. We're not breaking any of those perceptions down and analyzing them, right? I mean, they're as we talked about the other week, they're flitting through our mind too fast. They're just little IDs, ID tags, which flit through our mind, Just like that, okay? So, but when you start to examine things, that's when you then start to segue into emptiness. That's where you start to move into understanding emptiness and being able to find emptiness, right? So it's one thing to talk about the pen and where's the pen, and the pen is a bunch of colors and shapes, and there's a top and a bottom, and blah, 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 blah. And where is the pen, right? Well, the pen is right here in unexamined reality. In unexamined reality, it's a friggin' pen, and it's in my hand, and it writes, thank you very much. Okay, that's all I need to know. And if one were not a philosopher and one were not into deep analysis, that's probably all you'd ever hear about Buddhism. It's like, it's a stupid pen. What are you talking about? I'm not coming back, Right? But if then we're going to go further, we're going to examine it, then we're going to say, all right, let's do the deep dive here. What's really here? Is it a cylinder? Is there a cylinder? Is there a top? Is there a bottom? Right? This is a collection of parts. But what about the parts? Like, all right, there's the top. See? Okay, there's the body. Is there a top? When you start to then examine the parts, do you find a top? Well, there's an inside, there's an outside, there's a back, there's a front, there's a rim, there's a tip, etc., etc., etc. All right, where is the top? It's the same thing we talked about with me or with anything else. Does the top reside in the rim or inside or outside or front or back? It's a collection of parts with a concept applied to it. It's 4 steps, the process that we talked about. Okay? Okay, well then, let's not call it a top. Let's call it a
cap.
Yeah, okay. Call it a cap. All right? We'll take it. So, where's the cap? Yeah. Go for it, please. It's going to be a long class, but that's okay.
So here's my analogy. So imagine you have a rubber ball and a pyramid and a cube.
A cube?
Cube. Okay, all 3-dimensional objects, and you go to a wall and you throw each one of them against the wall. Say the wall is the mind, and the mind is able to select some, not all, or by its inner processes, elects to, we'll say, take up a certain portion of the total value of the object. So for a ball, okay, which is a sphere, the wall will register a circle. Okay, and for the cube, it'll register a square. And the pyramid will register a triangle. Each of those impressions is a selective reception of only a small fraction of the veritable enormity of each of these multi-dimensional objects. So that's the moment of perception, where a portion of the total raw data, okay, is apprehended and organized, okay, in a way that is internally cohesive. I say after the fact, the mind will look at itself and then say, of the round thing, oh look, a circle, and of the pyramid, oh look, a triangle. And of the square here, of the cube, it'll say here's a square. But that the impression and the impression was received, and the organization, the selection of what data to take up, and then the operation by which it was organized to be internally consistent, all took place, and the impression was made online before the moment arrived when a label could even be applied. You could have easily have called it a square, a triangle, or Okay, but the point is that it happened after the fact. The labeling of this cube as a square could not have occurred as a precondition to the impression. It was a subsequent, the labeling was subsequent to the impression, which was complex, not just the intake of the raw data, but the selection from amongst all the raw data, what portion of it came to organize into the square, as opposed to understanding its density or its specific gravity or its color or any such thing. So there's a million things that the mind didn't take on when it accepted the impression of its contact with the object as a square rather than a cube or anything else. So I say that the notion of labeling as being a constituent process of perception, so I take issue with it. I say it's a subsequent.
But you're only
process.
saying, but the only part of it that you're acknowledging is the part where you decided it was a pyramid and a square and a circle. There are all sorts of, before that it could have just been black dot, something, you know what I mean? Like we could be perceiving like burning in your arm and you're like, oh, burn, what is burn? And then you realize, oh, I got bit by a spider. And it's like your analogy is like you're only talking about the part where you decided it was a spider bite.
No, I'm just saying that the mind did what it did without reference to it. That there's other operations at work. And you could also, as always, argue that it was prior karma, which induced the mind to take up selective portions of the raw data, and those which made up what later labeled the square, and ignore all the rest.
I'm not sure what your point
But your argument is ignoring the rest of the.
I'm not sure what your point is.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's just a different way of looking at these steps. It's like we walk down these steps and we see all these different raw datas, and I wish I had something in my bag that is a found object. Because I have a whole collection of found objects at home that I have no idea what they do. No clue. They look cool. There's this ceramic thing I'm thinking of, no idea what it is. Still don't know what it is after years of having it. What is it? I haven't gotten to the 5th level yet where I've imposed a label on it. But once I do, that label will come first every time I see it. Because we all know pen, even though he's been holding up a marker, we all know it is pen because we've already made that label. So I think the whole point of the exercise is to realize that we do that all day long, and we need to stop doing that all day long. Because I'm labeling John, and I'm not aware that these are all projections of my karma.
But that's the point, though, is that we can't stop doing it all day long, and that is the simple, unexamined existence. Is that we are conceptualizing all day long, and I mean, I'm not sure if I got your point, Bruce. You know, whether the conceptualization precedes or antecedes something, it's still going on, right? And the mind is still giving something a handle to identify it and to relate to it and to
I'm just
interact with it.
arguing about the sequence.
Okay.
So in this rendering, it sounds as though the label has to precede, or is being given as preceding the cognition of the pen as a pen. And I'm saying that the cognition of the pen as a that
Creates a label.
is the precedent condition, and then after the fact, the mind says, I need some sort of shorthand, okay, to reassemble, make sure it will reassemble, okay, these particular facets of this greater reality, and so it creates the label as a convenience, not as a necessary and precedent state to the apprehension of it as such.
It sounds to me too that Bruce is talking about the changeability, that the label doesn't define and apply, can be changeable. And in Lama Christie's book, she in chapter on parts, she asks the question: Is there ever an instance where a circle can be a triangle? And you think, of course not. But then what's shown is a picture of a teacup. Right? Looked at this way, it's a circle. Turned on its side, it becomes a teacup. And so your mind then has to accept that, yes, indeed. And then looked at from one perspective, the label can change. It doesn't hold to it.
Yeah, right, because the identification of that occurs prior to the label. And that's all I'm arguing against. And as I understand it, or misunderstand it, the teachings are giving the label as the organizing principle by which and through which we come to penness.
Well, if you think about the nature of projection, if I think about the nature of projection, right? I take in data into my mind. My mind whirls around and spins around and pops something up and says, that's what it is. Right? That's all. Is it anything other than that from your perception?
Oh, just my little point, which I think it happens so quickly that we have come to the misapprehension of the label of the cart being in front of the horse. And that the label, once it's been established, is then used to summon.
You were getting the idea from the teachings that the label came before the data?
That the teachings are saying, okay, that the label is the organizing principle, without which we can't appreciate the pen as a pen. Okay,
And so,
if that's what it really means, then I take issue with that.
So, if you look at the 4 steps, right? You take in the data, right? Then you have a mental image that arises, which is imputed onto the stuff, right? The data, onto the data, right? So then you project it, right? I mean, you internally conceive it, then you project it, right? And then you experience it. That's it. Take in the data, internally process it, come up with pen or dog or whatever. Project it, experience it as that. That's all.
That's Dak, Shi, Ming, Tang, in that order. I think you're in agreement. I don't think he's saying the name comes first. I think there's a problem with Ming being called, translated into the word name. But what it means is that, that thing, that's Ming.
Ming is like the way you think about it.
Yeah, and then according to this, Ming is called name, translated as name, but it means concept, the mental image. And then Tanya is the term applied to that.
We have to move on.
Fine.
It's very late. It's okay. It's a lot. It's a very extensive and deep class. So we have to take it down a level, right? We have to start looking at the raw data, and this becomes more and more profound and more difficult. And you have to be fairly mature in your thinking and have a lot of virtue to really get it. And given that you've gone through the first 2 courses in the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, you should have the virtue to do it. So it should help. So please say Gangsak, Gidakshi,
Gidakshi,
Yang, Takyu, Inam. So Gangsak means person, as in you. It means you, Chris, you, Paul, you personally, and then so now we start to talk about big emptiness, important emptiness, your emptiness. So when you see emptiness for the first time, you see the emptiness of Bruce. You don't see the emptiness of your meditation cushion. You see the emptiness of Bruce when you see emptiness for the first time. And that's why it has such power to liberate you from mental afflictions, because you recognize your lack of self-existence, right? Which is a powerful antidote. So if we start to talk about a person, me or any one of us, and we start to talk about the parts of a person, then what are the 2 most basic divisions of a person?
Body and mind.
Yeah, body and mind, right? If you're going to take this and just say that the 2 main components are your body and your mind, then there you go. Those are the parts of a person. I mean, you can get fancy and you can talk about 5 heaps, 5 skandhas, right? Where you say, well, we can break it up into 5 instead of 2, but we don't need to be fancy. So it's just John's mind and John's body, right? So there's this collection of stuff which is thought of as John, right? We call it these 2 parts of the mind and the body. So that would be Dakshi means the raw data again. Gi is just of, right? What is the raw data? It's the basis of projection. It's what's being projected upon, right? It's the stuff that's getting projected upon, the raw data, the basis of projection. Yang means even that. Takyu means projection. And yinam means is it? It's a question. Right? So is even the raw data of a person a projection? Right? So, I mean, I understand that whether I like my boss or I don't like my boss is a projection. I understand that, you know, it was a good day or it was a bad day as a projection. I understand, you know, all these subjective emotional states are a projection, right? I understand that, you know, yeah, this is a collection of parts, and I project the identity of pen onto it in whatever order, right? But what about, you know, what about the parts? You know, what are they? What is the raw data? The raw data for this thing are called the raw data of the parts. You know, the inside, the outside, the top, the bottom, the cylinder, the cap, the ink, the rest, right? The name. All these things are the parts. But what about those, right? I mean, what about the very existence of this thing? What about the very existence of the parts, of the raw data? You know, does that exist, right? I mean, if I were a different kind of being and I walked in here, you know, what would I see? I mean, I wouldn't see a pen. If I were a fly, I'd see, I don't know what. Or a dog, I'd see the chute, right? But, I mean, I like Hector, somebody else doesn't like Hector. It goes way beyond that. If an entirely different kind of being walked in here, they'd see an entirely different object here. They would see a bliss-producing object, not something you write with and not something that it's like an insurmountable mountain that you have to climb over if you're a little ant or something, right? So the very existence of this thing in the room is also a projection. There is no base data. The raw data is also a projection. And so we have to talk about that. So, you know, Master Shantideva could come in here and see this beatific shining angel, and someone else could come in and see a schmuck. You know, no problem. Or see somebody who's a demon, a threatening demon perhaps. You know, no problem, no contradiction. Why? Because the identity is not coming from this. The identity is imputed from the observing being, right? The mind of the being doing the perception. So then there's no contradiction, right? So, so there's a basic distinction between two kinds of emptiness. There's the emptiness of me, there's the emptiness of John, or the emptiness of Hector, or you, and then there's the emptiness of the parts, or the raw data. And so these are sort of the two great divisions of emptiness when you're analyzing emptiness and studying emptiness. And that leads to two great parts in the 9th chapter of the guide, Bodhisattva Charya Tara. So Master Shantideva finds it necessary at this juncture to start to discuss the parts of a person and no longer talk about the person as a whole. Right? So then he starts to do a deep dive and go down a level. Right? So, I mean, we've already proved that the whole is not self-existent. Right? And if the whole is not self-existent, as in John, I as a whole am not self-existent. I'm a name, an identity conceived of based upon the collection of my body and mind. Right? And I can be a schmuck, or I can be a holy being, or I can be whatever based upon however I'm being experienced, right? So no problem, I've already got that. So, and because I don't have any nature of my own, and because I don't have any identity of my own, outside of that conceptualization, valid conceptualization, I could be anything. You know, I could be a demon, I could be an angel, validly. Right? And so we have to talk about it. We have to talk about it more. But you can see just from the perception of name and ideation that anything could be anything. So, and that's why, you know, the reason I'm in samsara right now is because my past karma is forcing me to perceive all these lousy things instead of all these beautiful holy things, right? And I have ups and downs in my life because I collected lousy karma in the past. So, and the karma is fluctuating. Karma wears out, karma ripens. I have something good, the karma wears out, the good thing goes away. I have something crappy happen to me. You know, it lasts for however long, the karma wears out, it goes away. And life just goes on and on and on like that, fluctuating endlessly, right? And it's responsible for all the changes in my life. And most of the experiences in my life are mixed because most of the karma that I've collected is what's called dirty karma. You know, it doesn't last. So my experience of my body, my mind, people around me, my work, all of it fluctuates. So I mean, I remember when I first started working at it, I had this idea somehow that if you got money and you worked and you bought nice things, that everything would be okay. You know, I remember when I started first, I was like, yeah. Let me share my experience with you on that. I was like, I'm going to buy some really nice clothes. I'm going to buy a really nice shirt. And I'll have this great shirt, and it'll be great quality, and it'll look beautiful, and it'll last, and then everything will be great. I'll do this with my clothes, you know? So I bought the great shirt. And then it wore out. You know, I washed it. One shrunk. You know, another one got snagged. Another one I got too fat. You know, whatever it was, right? And, you know, some of them lasted for a couple of years. But eventually they were all done and gone. And I was like, crap. I thought if I got this really good stuff and it would like just, somehow it would stay. You know, somehow things would be maintained. Somehow I'd get there and it would just be like, I finally got the good stuff. Now I'm just set. But it doesn't work that way. You know, you get the good stuff and then it just falls away one way or another, right? Sadly. So, oh well. It's the nature of everything. You know, friends become enemies for a while, maybe for a long time. Enemies can become neutral or friends. And it just goes on and on and on, right? So, you know, Master Shantideva says, didn't you ever wonder about the colors and shapes and where they're coming from and what their nature and what their identity is? Yeah, you can look at somebody and say, yeah, that's their, you know, this body and mind, and I'm calling him Bruce, but where does the arm come from, and the colors and the shapes and the texture? Where does all that come from, right? Did you ever think about that? Did you ever examine that? Right? And so he starts to go into that. He says we have to discuss the emptiness of the parts also. We have to discuss the emptiness of the parts of the person. So when you see emptiness directly, you see the emptiness of yourself as a whole person. You see the emptiness of your identity and nature as a whole, as John. You know? But you have to understand the emptiness of your parts to lead up to that. You have to understand the emptiness of your components, if you will, and lead up to that. So there are two great kinds of emptiness. So first, please say Gangsak.
Gangsak.
Gidakme.
Gidakme.
Gangsak again is you. Person Gi is of. Dak is self-existent. And Me is not. Okay. So it's the lack of any self-existent nature in a person, right? When I look down and say, this is John's hand, right? I'm looking at the sum of parts and conceiving it as John's hand, right? Well, what are the parts that make up John's hand? Well, there's some fingers and a thumb and some skin and some space and all the rest, right? But then, what about my fingers? You know, I got five, okay, there's 5 fingers. Well, I can take my thumb, there's joints making up the thumb, okay, then there's the left side and the right side of the joint, and then there's the skin and what's under the skin, and you know, it goes on and on and on, ad infinitum, down to cells and atoms and muons and leptons and whatever other things there are, right? So, okay, so the second one, please say Chuki.
Chuki.
Dakme.
Dakme.
Chu here means dharma or thing. The fact, so again, it's dak is self-existent, me is not. So it's the fact that nothing has any nature of its own. No thing has any self-nature. Now when they use thing here, there's a very specific meaning and a very specific connotation in Buddhist philosophy. When they talk about the emptiness of the thing, when they're talking about the division of emptiness, they're only talking about the parts of the person, so don't get tripped up. When they talk about the emptiness of a thing, they're not talking about the cup lid. Okay, the thing here means a very specific connotation, which is your parts. It's just the language. Okay, so when we talk about the emptiness of the persons and things, when we talk about the emptiness of persons and things, we're talking about the emptiness of you and the emptiness of your parts that make you up. Right? So don't get tripped up by the language. All right. So when you're examining the parts of the person, we're not the body, we're not the mind, right? We're a concept imputed upon that, right? I accept the idea that John is an idea which is put on top of the body and mind here, somehow overlaid or somehow imposed upon or associated with the body and the mind here, right? No problem. So, but then what about my parts? Are my parts projections also? Are my fingers projections? Are my fingers concepts, right? We have to look into the emptiness of the parts, right? So pick a part you're going to look at. I mean, take my thumb, right? So is it self-existent? Does my thumb really exist? It's here. In an unexamined way, obviously. It's here and I use it for texting. In an examined way, does my thumb exist? Really, from its own side? No. I mean, why? Right?
Not a thumb. It's not a thumb.
Not as thumb. It has a top, it has a bottom, it has a left, it has a right. Okay? And so, you can divide my thumb into halves, and then into eighths, and then into sixteenths, and then into 32nds, and you just keep going infinitely, right? Never stops, right? I mean, down to the atoms, but then when you get down to the atoms and you say, well, are the atoms real? If you get down to the atomic level, then the atoms are really real. The atoms are really there, right? But then you get into the same issue, right? What about the top of the atom, or the bottom of the atom, or the left side of the atom, or the right side of the atom, right? So, our heart and our mind and our society really tells us somehow if we get down to the atomic or the subatomic level, we're going to find some little piece, some little part, some little bit which is really there, which is the building block of all matter and all existence, right? And that's what science tells us. They keep looking and they keep looking and they keep looking. We're going to find the God particle, or the smallest particle, whatever it is, right? So, and if you can find a self-existent particle, then everything that's built upon that would be self-existent, right? You don't find it. So, and if you don't find that little part, self-existent part, then my thumb isn't self-existent. Because it's just endless parts being identified and conceptualized as a thumb, right?
Goes in both directions too.
In what way do you mean?
If you're in another galaxy, your thumb is just some piece of a rock.
I might follow that one.
If you're from another galaxy and you're looking out, all you see is this big rock.
Or maybe like a little
somewhere.
twinkling light or something. Perhaps,
So,
yeah. All you see is a twinkling light.
The same way, because
Yeah.
it's infinite in both directions. Your thumb is indistinguishable from
That's lovely.
my thumb if you're on another planet. It's too small to see.
Yeah. I mean, look. I mean, we when we walk outside, we say, "I'm not going to step in front of a bus because the bus is made of steel and I'm soft and it's going to squash me." And that's how things work, right? There is a hardness in the bus, in the steel of the bus. The hardness resides in the steel of the bus. The softness resides in my flesh and my tissue. And when these two things meet, I get squashed, right? I mean, we think that's how we conceptualize things. We think steel is hard. The hardness resides in the steel, right? Somewhere in that steel, somewhere, somehow, resident in that steel is hardness, right? Well, it is, same with a table, right? Well, that's at the level of unexamined reality. At the level of examined, more deeply examined reality, you have to find that hardness somewhere, right? Yeah. And it's in the atoms. We think it's in the atoms, right? And if you find certain atoms and certain configurations of atoms, then there's hardness, right? Yeah, go ahead.
But this is the searching for the ground, the constituent, the irreducible constituent element, is a fool's errand. But we don't have to keep chasing after the will-o'-the-wisp, because if we can pay attention to something that hasn't yet been stated in this particular progression, which is every time you take the analysis of the parts of something. So I have the hand, and I'm identifying the hand as a gotcha, the object I deny. It's a whole, right, in this set of definitions that constitute hand. So then I say, well, I'm going to do the emptiness analysis. So I'm going to take thumb as one of the parts of hand. And so now I'm going to look and see if the thumb is indivisible, and lo and behold, it's not. So we go forever in search of the parts of something, but what hasn't been noticed in this progression is that every time we do that, we create a new whole. Okay, there's a new referent to what whole means. Now, whereas whole once meant hand, now in this progression of emptiness analysis, whole means thumb. And if you get down to, well, now I'm going to say the joints of the thumb, or whatever it is the next stage in my analysis. You say, well, now the definition of whole is a joint of the thumb. And after you do that 3 times, okay, it's possible to say, you know what, this is an endless set of relationships, always to be discovered in level after level of iteration between something we'll label a whole and something we'll label impartedness. Okay, or the aptitude for the whole to be rendered in parts. And it's J. Jedrock all over again. It's the principle of the whole having meaning only in contrast to the principle, okay, the characteristic. Okay, and it's always relational. There'll always be something that you can label a whole. You assemble its label of parts, okay, because you can always divide the whole. And there's always a way to assemble a whole out of its parts, and you don't need to regress or progress in the analysis through an infinite number of levels. Do it 3 times, and you come to the real.
Three times is enough for you.
3 times. Okay, we're at a steady state. We're at a steady state in the analysis, and it will never ever change. You have an assemblage of something which we'll label a whole, and you have a deconstruction of something which we'll call parts. And there's never anything else to find. There's always a whole, and there's always its parts. Okay, but only in relationship with one another, directly. And the rest of it is inferential. You know, an ascending series of wholes and a descending series of parts. Okay, but that we can call anything a whole and anything a part of that particular whole is always going to be a matter of the dualistic.
But isn't that the point, though? Isn't the point that every time you go down another level, you change your name and your concept?
Yeah, but you have the same reality. There's a thing which is the whole of its parts, and you have a thing that's the parts of its whole. Okay, so in that sense of logical reductionism, there's no new fact to find.
Well, there is, because it can lead you to seeing that the top level concept doesn't exist as you conceive of it. Right?
Yeah.
If you want to talk about, let's say you go down 10, you only want to go down 3 levels, but let's say you go down 10 levels, okay, it doesn't matter. I mean, if you talk about the level of a human being, I'm a man, I'm a human being, you get down to the level of, I'm body and mind, and you go down to the level of fingers and toes and torso and the rest. And you keep going down and you keep going down. You've changed the identity and you've changed the concept and you've changed the nature of the thing as you go down, right? So, in this reductionist way, you can say you're relabeling smaller parts of the whole, right? And so this is an exercise to understand that it is an infinite regression, and by doing an infinite regression, that you never find a self-existent object which you were thinking of at the top level. So if I'm thinking of John at the top level as being a self-existent being, right? Well, I just found out that I'm an infinite regression, not a self-existent being, right? And that's the point. So, because you're well studied in this and you're well versed in this, but someone who is thinking about their identity and their nature would think, well, I really am here. I really do exist, and I really am here, and I really am a person the way I think of myself, and this is my identity. This is it. So it's an exercise in going past that, right? It's a way to go past that and to go beyond that. And so there are we have to go through a lot of different angles of looking at it. And so, we're following the text of Master Shantideva, and it's one of the angles that he takes. So we'll go through it.
Well, and understanding it logically. I don't know about you. I'm sure you're flawless, but understanding it logically is way different than acting that way. You can understand that in your head and still conduct your life like it's without any realization of it. And I do.
All right. So we got to move on. So please say Sukhi. Sope, Dul, Chara. So Suk means physical matter. I mean, basically your body, the colors and shapes that make up your body, basically is what's being referred to. In this context, it's the skandhas. Sope means a collection of parts. Ki is just of, like your collection of parts, as in my arms and my legs and the rest. Right? Toes and the left side of my toe and the right side of my toe. And then, regression, right? Dul means particle, and chara means atomic. So this is getting into this idea of the Turok means ultimately small particle. Obviously, they didn't name atomic particles 1,000 years ago. They called them infinitely small particles. So, ultimately small particles. So, you know, I may not have an objective reality from my side, but what about my arm, or what about my thumb, or what about the rest, right? So, do atoms exist from their own side or not? No, they're a name, they're a term, they're a concept, right? We talked about it last week. It's just another level. So, what is the raw data, and where is the raw data? You know, we think we're interpreting raw data, but where is the raw data? If we're saying, I look at John, and, you know, I do my infinite regression down to atoms, right? But then their atoms aren't there from their own side. There are no atoms. That's just a term and a concept also. You get to the point where there is no raw data, right? Raw data doesn't exist, you know? I mean, the idea of raw data is just something I made up for your convenience. There is no raw data. Because if you want to call atoms the raw data, atoms don't exist from their own side. They're infinitely regressible. Right? And so when we start to talk about, well, I'm perceiving raw data through my senses, there is no raw data from its own side. Right? Because we're perceiving an infinite regression. Right?
There were things here before you got here.
What does that mean, Chris? I'm not sure what you mean.
I'm saying that your interpretation of the data is strictly through your own filter of how you're perceiving it, but yet there were things that existed prior to you existing on this planet to perceive the lack of.
Yeah. So a very important point. It's not that there's nothing, right? Because that's an extreme wrong view. That's one of two wrong views. No, there's nothing there, right? Just as it's an extreme wrong view to say self-existent things are there. That's why it's moved away. So, you know, we're not focusing so much on the fact that we're not so much addressing the wrong view of nothing's there. We're focusing on the wrong view of self-existent things are there. So we're breaking down this self-existent wrong view that things are really there from their own side. So what we're saying is yeah, definitely something's there, but it isn't what you thought it was. What you thought was there, your body, your parts, your atoms, your subatomic particles. Keep going, baby. There is no raw data.
Or the notion that you were at some point not here.
Say it again?
He's talking about a moment.
Yeah.
Right? Prior to his experiencing of it and predicating into that moment, that there was some sort of ambient reality.
Mm-hmm.
So he's assuming, okay, that there was really a moment in which he wasn't there to project even the prior reality, as opposed to predicating a prior reality being present, of which you were not aware until some cognitive later moment that you then, through volition or karmic compulsion, then simply allowed yourself to notice. I'm not saying it's true, but can we really prove it isn't true?
See, you know, when you start, this is why we don't teach this unless the person is well educated, because you can get lost in this, and it can be this thing where someone kind of starts feeling lost and confused, and it's like nothing's there, nothing matters, and it all just somehow dissolves, and that's not the point. We can see things at the molecular level, or the level of our cells, or our skin, or our body, or whatever the case might be. We can see things at the level of being a tantric deity, or all of those levels are there, right? The level that we're perceiving at, we're forced to perceive at, forced upon us by our past karma. Our past karma is forcing us to perceive in a certain way at a certain level. Okay? There is no raw data there. Our past karma is forcing us to perceive what's there as raw data, as atoms, as cells, as whatever you will perceive it, right? If we had different karma, if we had collected different karma in the past, we would be perceiving something entirely different. We would be perceiving at a different level of reality. We'd be perceiving a different realm. We'd be perceiving a different body, a different being, right? That's why there are 5 different realms in Buddhism. You know, you perceive the realm according to your past karma, as it dictates and as it directs, right? As it causes the perception. So all of those levels are valid. What keeps me in this world? What maintains the perception of being a human being in this realm and in this world? It's karma. It's karma's ripening. And when those karmas wear out, when those karmas shift, then I have a perception of a thing called death and a perception of a thing called existing and being reborn in another realm, right? So, you know, the karmas that we've collected will keep us here until they're worn out, and then we won't be here anymore. We'll be somewhere else, right? And there are thousands and thousands and thousands of different realities that we can perceive, right? I mean, I remember Holy Geshe Michael talking in the first 3 retreat teachings towards the end, where he was saying, you know, this realm and this world is like a rose petal in the ocean. And sorry, a rose petal in the entire universe. He said there are countless realms where things don't even function. You know, where fire is not hot, and where solid is not hold together, and where, you know, where things don't even function in the way where we perceive them to function. They're just realms upon realms where nothing functions and nothing works and nothing holds together. You know, where beings are instantly born and suffer and die, you know, endlessly. So, you know, the notion of being assured to be in this realm is not accurate. You know, we have to collect the karma to you know, maintain our reservation in the penthouse suite, you know, at the 5-star resort, you know, and not end up on Skid Row, cosmic Skid Row, right? So our karma can throw us into any level at any time of any reality, and our past deeds are the things which are going to force us to perceive paradise, angels, or miserable suffering realms, or completely chaotic, you know, nonsensical, disorganized realms. And so, you know, the fact that we can collect the karma to perceive a holy, angelic, paradisical realm is very encouraging. You know, it means we're not trapped in a human realm, just in the samsaric realm of endless suffering and endless fluctuation. So, you know, we either collect the karma for a paradisical realm or not. You know, if we want to collect that karma, how do you do it? Bodhisattva activities, right? How do you learn Bodhisattva activities? Study the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. Right? Keep your Bodhisattva vows. Act like a Bodhisattva. If we don't, you know, if we neglect our morality, and if we neglect our ethics, then when this karma wears off, then we're, you know, at some point adrift, you know, in infinite cosmic permutations and possibilities of, you know, chaos and dysfunction. And so many possible levels of reality. To be set adrift in that is you know, we're in trouble. So important to watch our morality and not set ourselves adrift endlessly in you know, in suffering realms. So scriptures say it takes millions of lifetimes to get back to a place like this and to hear these things. You know? So the possibilities are endless. And why? Because there is no raw data. There are no atoms. There is no order from its own side. There is no human organism from its own side. You know, there is no birth from its own side. You know, it's something which we organize and perceive because it's forced upon us by our past karma. And if we don't have that past karma, we will not perceive beings with functional bodies and minds that can think and experience joy and pleasure and understand things and collect the right karma to become enlightened. So there's no reality beyond what our karma forces us to see. You know? If our karma forces us to see a reality of chaos where nothing works and a thought can't be framed, then that's the reality we'll perceive. You know? And if our karma forces us to perceive a well-organized, thoughtful place where we have, where we are organisms which can function and think and accomplish things and collect virtue, then that's the reality we'll be in. So, no assurances. Okay. So, keeping our vows and acting kindly towards others is the thing that can turn this body into an tantric angel's body. And if we do the opposite, then we're just cutting ourselves off and drifting and hoping that we might actually get back here someday. Okay. So I think let's take a break there, a brief break, and then we'll come back. We're about a little more than halfway.